Welcome to Sit and Stay, the podcast that breaks down the challenges of starting and maintaining a mental health practice into digestible chapters. Sit and Stay is presented by RipsyTech, an electronic health record company committed to addressing the mental health crisis in the United States.
Hello, and welcome back to the Sit and Stay podcast, the show where mental health providers learn to keep their practice healthy alongside their patients, brought to you by RipsyTech, an electronic health record company dedicated to addressing the mental health crisis in the United States. I, as always, am RipsyTech product manager Parker Anderson, and I am joined by founder and CEO of RipsyTech, the empathetic Tom Tarshis. Hi, Tom.
Parker, nice to be back. I think it's our first podcast in maybe 4 weeks or so,
It feels like it's been a month, yes.
And I actually gave Parker the adjective today because I am feeling empathy for Parker, who is a new parent, and as such did not get a ton of sleep last night. So we want to boost his adrenaline for this podcast. But since I have had 5 children past that stage Parker's in now, I definitely have empathy for those sleepless nights and then powering through work days.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah. Today is a particularly low energy day, I think. This has probably been my lowest energy day in the past week. So I hope it doesn't come across that way in the actual podcast, but maybe just right now. But I'm rallying the troops in my own brain, little inside out situation. I'm getting them going.
Very good.
So yeah, this is the first episode that we've recorded in about a month, as you said earlier, and a lot has happened since then. As you know, I had a child, in the past we've talked about kind of like collective stress events, and sometimes in life it feels like there's no shortage of collective stress events, and now would maybe be one of those times. And I believe we kind of phrased the current situation with I guess this phrase of like economic uncertainty. Let's go with economic uncertainty. And so you and I were talking yesterday about how, in the context of being a mental health provider, if you are running your own private practice, you're really self-employed, and you were kind of mentioning like how being self-employed in times of economic uncertainty can be its own safety measure. So that's kind of the overarching topic that we wanted to address today. So I guess before I dive into my first question, do you have anything that you wanted to kind of say on your own?
Yeah, and I think over the past year we've talked about a lot of the stresses or complications or some of the difficulties of being self-employed or starting a practice, and that's the point is to try to help people with that. But there are we've talked about some of the advantages with respect to setting your own schedule or some other pieces of being your own boss, but there are 2 very powerful positive benefits of being self-employed and also with just being a mental health clinician. One, which it just crosses my mind because I was thinking about some events that have happened because of the economic uncertainty. Many of the parents of the kids we treat, or a lot of our patients, have actually been laid off or lost their positions. And that always reminds me of how fortunate I am, and actually all mental health clinicians are, to be in a field where you really have job security, and you really have the job security at any age. So it's one of the few fields that as you get older, on some level you get more revered, or that your experience really counts. And if you're a developer, since I'm a developer, if you're a developer working for a big company, I would be worried as someone who has crossed age 50 and these young kids coming out of training, like, hey, who's on the chopping block next? I think that would be a rational fear. I could still, take them down. But, some of the parents who have crossed that and lost their position are really panicking about, their next steps.
Right.
But so if you're a mental health clinician or psychologist, therapist, psychiatrist, that is just not something we have to worry about. Yet you will have work, and you actually will be more revered the older you get because of that experience. That piece aside, though, when you are self-employed and running your own business, you don't really, in this field as a mental health clinician, you don't have to worry about job loss or actually business loss or income loss during these economic slumps. Like, it's not asterisk. That's not totally true when you're running a cash practice, because if the rest of the world has less disposable income, cutting mental health services is often, right below food, rent, what are some things that we have to push through. But in general, because there's no shortage of mental health issues and needs, and potentially all that's, well, we'll talk about that more, but a lot of that's offset when there's more stress and economic downturn. It's just a good job security piece and a nice thing about being a self-employed mental health clinician.
So, what about not being self-employed as a mental health clinician? Are there any risks of relying on employment of, like a larger group when you're like a healthcare group when the economy's not looking so hot? Does that play out any differently than being self-employed as a mental health clinician?
Yeah, it's a great question, and there are actually a lot of large mental health agencies have been acquired by private equity groups. And I think universally, none of these companies are actually doing great right now. I think in the latest round of large layoffs, though, it hasn't been clinicians who've been laid off. It's been a lot of middle management and non-clinicians that have lost the majority, that have been the majority of the layoffs. That being said, if you are working for a large company and the economic downturn, sort of pushes towards bankruptcy and the whole agency closes, then you would be forced into finding another position or starting a practice. But the nice thing is, no matter where you're working as a mental health clinician, it is one of the easiest models for beginning cash private practice telehealth situation that anyone can get rolling very quickly. And so at worst case scenario, you will have income coming again pretty quickly.
So I want to kind of touch base on what you said about kind of private equity, venture capital, because that was the topic that we discussed in our last episode. And we had actually put out a poll on our YouTube channel. I meant to talk about this last time, but we've gotten more votes since then, so it's kind of nice that we waited. We asked the question, how do you feel about the growing involvement of private equity and venture capital and mental health practices? Vote and tell us why in the comments. And the half of the votes that we got felt negatively. The rest were a little spread across the board, with neutral having a slightly higher skew and positive and not sure being kind of getting one vote each. So, and we got two comments. The first comment said, having experienced this firsthand, there's little these groups can do to improve efficiency, as they're not groups in mental health, and further they just end up representing another mouth to feed in terms of taking resources away from the people actually providing the care. And the second comment said, I agree with the other comment. Couldn't have said it better. Private equity and venture capital do nothing to help mental health professionals provide services. They leech money away from therapists who are providing the care. Just another unwanted middleman that actually lowers our income. So some spicy hot takes there.
Yeah, and you can read some emotional content there maybe, but it very, very accurate, right? And it is that, if you go work for a company, the trade-off of what that company takes in their cut of the revenue generated has to feel good in order for you to be willing to accept that lower salary. And that's kind of these, what are you getting? And we're, with our nonprofit, we're about to re-embark on growth this year. And so it is this path where, you work for yourself, you pay your own overhead, and you keep everything else. You go work for an entity, the company is probably keeping, 30 to 40%, maybe even up to 50% of what you generate is actually then going into supporting the company. Some of that is to keep the company afloat. Some of it is for health insurance, retirement, vacation. So from all those other perks, you need that to make up. Well, and you don't keep 100% on your own, of course. But there's right. Maybe a 30% gap there. So, hey, am I going to work for 30% less? Well, yeah, I am, because I get 6 weeks of a vacation. Someone schedules for me. I have coverage, and all those things have to make your life easier to be willing to do that. And hence, when you add, if a private equity venture, other groups come in that have other managers and needs, et cetera, the share that they take tends to be a lot higher.
So I want to kind of quickly segue into a quote that, when you brought up this topic, this quote that I came across back in the fall of last year kept coming to mind, and it was from the LinkedIn co-founder Reid Hoffman, and this quote was kind of shared quite a bit through different people's Medium articles or on LinkedIn. And it's funny because they keep referring to this video, and I actually can't find the video, but it's the quote from him. So Reid Hoffman founded LinkedIn, and he's kind of been supposedly touted as being really good at predicting the future, so to speak. Like, he predicted social media back in 1997, or every time he's kind of made a prediction, it's ended up coming true. So his latest prediction was that the 9-to-5 work model will be extinct by 2034, and that most people will be working in the gig economy and may have 2 or 3 gigs, and that you may not be doing a lot of your work fully as an employee for one entity. So so when you brought this topic up, it kind of made me think about the growing gig economy, and kind of how if you're a mental health provider and you're self-employed, to some degree, I almost kind of feel like a lot of mental health providers are doing this already. Some people might have their own practice that they're working for. They might be seeing patients as part of a group. They might be doing work with the county. I mean, I think you can kind of speak to some of that. I just kind of wanted to point out the parallel there, and maybe that kind of speaks to the idea behind the quote, which is that the economy is, currently it's uncertain, and things are rapidly evolving and changing, and then perhaps in the future, to bulletproof our income a little bit more, it'll be to our benefit to kind of doing a bit more freelance work outside of a 9-to-5 role. And then mental health providers seem to be kind of doing that on their own, and that's why we're talking about how being self-employed in times of economic uncertainty is a safety measure. So that was kind of a lot of words, but any thoughts there?
No, I it feels like solid data to support Reed's prediction, because the it's nice in this field that you have that opportunity to kind of do multiple gigs. And I like almost everyone I know at some point in their career has been, yeah, I do a day for the county. It's sort of guaranteed and steady, and I get paid no matter what. I do the little work for this online company, which, yeah, I might not have as many patients, but I get paid more. And yeah, and and I also do a day for a nonprofit, like that. Sort of spreading yourself out over multiple entities. One is good for breaking up monotony. Some people like to have a lot of variety in what they do. And two, it does really protect just sort of your basic income and job security. And the model then goes to which, hey, if everyone in every field could sort of make sure that their income was protected by spreading out who they work for, we've been taking advantage of that for a long time in the mental health clinician field. My mind then goes to, is Parker going to only be 10 hours for me? Or, so then, right, the message goes to employers, like, can you, again, offer enough by being part of a collegial environment that such an awesome workplace and who you interact with, and you feel secure about it, that you don't need to make this gig shift. And that's always our goal. As about to grow our nonprofit, we want to really try to make that workplace awesome so people come. But knowing how things work, I envision the future is going to be, we're going to have a chunk of employees that do part-time work, and we are prepping for that, and we're happy to have them. And then we'll have a chunk of employees that cross that threshold for benefits and full-time work, and we'll take everyone who fits. But yeah, like, for people, a salesperson for Oracle, you're really dependent on how Oracle's doing. I don't think you have much to worry about if you're at Oracle, but that's not true completely. But yeah, why wouldn't you actually then, especially if you're mainly remote, why wouldn't you spread yourself off over several companies, sort of as job security and more variety? And it makes that prediction makes a lot of sense. And these economic panic times, and where people are seeing colleagues and other layoffs are happening, certainly create that feeling that I think people wish they had multiple sources of income.
Yeah, it's very understandable. I myself, part of me feels like, yeah, it's almost kind of slightly different if you're working in an industry that has perpetual and constant demand, like the healthcare industry, and how, like, people, how do I say? Well, we're always going to need providers. As far as like product managers for EHR companies, aka me, I like to think that we'll kind of always need me, but or at least need my type of role, not necessarily me. But
the world does need you, Parker.
Thanks, Tom. But it's an industry that's going to change, but it's an industry that's never going to go away. Like there's just so many different industries. As technology evolves, certain industries crop up and certain industries disappear. And yeah, when you see, and I think the layoffs that we see are kind of an indication of the changing times, the changing demands, but also the change in financial situations. So it's a lot kind of happening all at once, and right now really feels like we are kind of going through this metamorphosis across many, many, many different industries, not just due to AI, but for tariff related reasons or whatever. It's a lot that's changing right now. So with it being, I guess, sounding scary, what if if a provider's thinking about starting or growing a practice right now, what would you say to them?
Yeah, I mean, this is, as always, like it's always a great time to start or grow your practice. I think the one thing about times like this, and when people notice that, their cash paying patients, don't want to do those weekly appointments anymore. They drop off for care, or they're willing to find someone through their insurance. Like this is a great time for mental health clinicians, yeah, to maybe try out some of the negotiating skills that we try to help with, and maybe push to see if you can't get that one insurance contract, because once you have reasonable rates from one insurance company, you never have to worry about the economy affecting your potential flow of patients. Even without that, and especially for people who work with kids, right? Adults may be willing to sacrifice their own mental health care and treatment, but that is not really true for kids. Like parents, maybe even before food on the list of what do you need to pay for, and it's housing and then mental health care for my kids. So, it's unlikely that all of someone's clients from a cash practice would lose their jobs and then no longer want to come and be seen. But that being said, like if you do lose 10 of your 30 hours of patients, it's hard to maybe get new patients when people are worried about their own money.
Right.
But if they're calling their insurance to get it, then they're not worried about that at all.
Well put. Yeah, making good use of the, I guess, the demand to kind of leverage that with contract negotiations. I like
the other little piece in there, and this depends on your, again, some of the cynical view is, but to your question, well, around tough economic times
right.
tend to result in a clear association with increased mental health symptoms,
right,
for entire families. So what does happen is that there are many more requests for mental health services through insurance. And as we've talked about, there are not enough providers, and it's often a maddening, frustrating experience to find someone who accepts your insurance.
Right.
So, what that translates to is this is a good time to push hard on your reimbursement rates while negotiating with an insurer, because they are definitely having increasingly frustrated patients who need help. Then the cynicism piece is, the more clinicians that go and network with insurance companies, that's more services they have to pay for. That hurts the insurance company's profits. So that's this. It's not necessarily in the financial interests of the insurance companies to do that, but you definitely know that there are more people trying to use their insurance, and that translates to you as a clinician fighting hard on reimbursement rates and giving you a little extra, clout in demands for better payment.
Yeah, extremely well said. Extremely well said. It all kind of connects. All right. Well, before we wrap up, anything else you'd like to say on the topic before we move on to like a mental health business moment?
Yeah, it's any sort of uncertainty in the world, as we've talked about in some other episodes, creates increased mental health issues. But I do think, there are the natural disasters and traumas, which we've talked about, but those tend to be like it's happened and then it's over. Sometimes things are prolonged, but economic uncertainty is in this country probably the biggest stressor that's universally shared, and the effects that does to so many aspects of mental health are profound. So yeah, there's not an hour that goes by when in seeing the patients this week that this topic isn't brought up, even by very young kids. So
wow. Wow. Now, any stress over the price of the Nintendo Switch 2 potentially increasing due to tariffs? Has that come up at all? Certainly come up in my world, and I do think it's interesting that the Nintendo Switch kind of had this massive boom in popularity during the COVID era because it helped. A lot of people were home and it helped them kind of cope. And then now we're kind of going through a new economic uncertainty. And hey, the Switch 2 is here to help you. But anyway, I'm just kind of riffing. But yeah, I mean, has that come up?
Well, as a avid gamer and someone that likes to game with their patients for the reward, it's certainly on mine. I'd have to say though, it's more parents worrying about groceries or
yeah, obviously
rent payments. But I feel you.
Yeah, I have seen this, and I'm just kind of speaking candidly here. I have seen you read kind of comments in different places, and it's almost like some people didn't quite grasp how kind of difficult this tariff situation is until it came up like, oh hey, Nintendo's pausing their pre-orders and the Switch 2 might be more expensive. And it's like, wait a minute, whoa, this is bad. So yeah, it's just a funny little side story. But hopefully none of that happens, and hopefully everything ends up excellent for everybody. It's interesting times we're living through. So with that being said, any mental health business moments this week?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, we're looking to grow this year, and so we really need some more office space. And I don't know if we've talked about negotiating for office space or rent, but it is again one of these things that sometimes people don't know. You can vary. There are lots of ways to negotiate for rent. And, so, having done this dozens of times now, I've reached, there are lots of signs in the neighborhood for office space. And there's a couple of buildings I've always kind of liked. And so I reached out to the broker involved. And it is just such a good strategy to play it as cool as possible and take your time. Because it's sort of like you do the first email, hey, I saw there's space. And then, oh yeah, there's these things, it's this much, oh, it probably won't be available much longer, blah, blah, blah. And then you just sort of don't respond. And then 2 days later, another email, 3 days, hey, can I show it to you? Hey, actually, there's this other space that I bet we could get a good deal. Or, hey, what are you looking for? Okay. And just slow playing everything. And there's a lot of common sense there. Like a lot of people have left offices. There's a lot of empty office space. When people are saying this is high demand and won't be around much longer, that is a sales pitch. So like, I'm finally going to look in person at these office spaces tomorrow. And I've already, knocked the potential price down by a third, and there's still a lot more room to go. And just by really slow playing the process, people want to fill these empty spaces. And anyway, it's just something to share. And if we haven't done an episode about negotiating leases, that is definitely worth an episode. And starting early, not several months before the space is needed, and playing it cool can really, really pay off in savings. So
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. It's finding an office space is a topic we've talked about, but not. I don't think we've done a dedicated episode, or at least not looked at it from the angle of being able to negotiate rent, which is even news to me right now. So, okay, yeah, very interesting. Maybe we'll talk about that in a future episode, maybe sometime soon.
Awesome.
All right, Tom. This has been a great episode, so let's wrap it up there. I'll say thank you for tuning into this week's episode of the Sit and Stay podcast, brought to you by RipsyTech. If you have any questions or you're interested in being a guest on the show, actually, I think we're recording a guest episode next week, now that I think about it. If you're interested in either of those things, send us an email at sitandstay@ripsytech.com, and that'll be it for today. All right, Tom, I will see you next time.
Good to see you, Parker. Your energy level was same or better than usual.
I think the talking definitely lifted me. This is the first it's like 2:53 p.m. On the East Coast, and this is the first conversation I've had today. So
there you go.
It got me going. All right, Tom. I'll see you later.
Take care.
Bye.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of the Sit and Stay podcast. Until we meet again, we invite you to sit and stay with the ideas and stories shared today. Dive deeper into how RipsyTech can support your practice by visiting us at RipsyTech.com.